Very first speaker, please welcome up to the stage the founder of Huber Social, Georgina Camp.
Good evening. My name is Georgina Camp and I'm a co-founder of Huber Social. And tonight I'm going to be talking to you about measuring well-being. But firstly, we meet on Wajak Noongar Budja. And I recognise their unbroken connection to this country, their culture and communities. And I pay my respects to the people, the culture and elders, past, present and future. Indigenous Australians for tens of thousands of years have been cultivating ways of knowing and being that foster well-being. This is an understanding of well-being that extends from within the individual through our kin and our family, recognising we are all connected. It's an understanding of well-being that extends, it's not just contained within one lifetime, but is all of time. And it's this level of sophistication that's inspired us at Huber Social, but quite frankly, we can only strive to try and reflect in the work that we do. But we are grateful for the opportunities to learn from our First Nations people in Australia and elsewhere. So, why do we need to measure well-being? Well, I'll first begin with a story. Oh, sorry. Did you know that for the longest time, we didn't know how to measure longitude? We understood it as a concept, but we thought it was impossible, so much so that looking for longitude was synonymous with attempting the impossible. So we relied on the linear measure of latitude to set our course. And for decades, we got by, and of course this is Western navigation because Indigenous communities once again had other ways of navigating that didn't rely on longitude and latitude, but that's another story. So coming back to longitude and latitude, Western nations got by with latitude. But as the wealth of nations grew and more we traded on the oceans, the cost of cargo lost at sea and the amount of lives became unsustainable. So nations came together and they set prize money for those that could work out how to measure longitude. Traditionally, the race was between astronomers and mathematicians. But in the end, a wild card claimed the prize. A humble jeweller called John Harrison, who made a timepiece that was able to keep time at sea. Now, why do I tell this story? Because I believe we find ourselves in a similar position today. For decades, if not hundreds of years, we have relied on one single measure, one linear measure of progress, financial value. But again, the wealth gap widening, we've just heard that now we've got trillion-dollar enterprises. This is not serving us. And until we learn how to measure well-being alongside financial value, we're going to continue to make decisions at the cost of our personal, collective, and environmental well-being. So, how do we measure well-being? Well, this is the question that Huber Social set out to explore more than 10 years ago now. And focusing on the people side of well-being, we worked with different groups and sectors across Australia and overseas, and some of the most vulnerable groups. And we came to recognise that although we all come to the table with different challenges and privileges, the goal for each of us is the same. And that's about being in the best position to fulfil our potential and achieve well-being. So let's start by trying to understand what do we really mean by well-being. It's not an emotion, it's something a little bit more solid than that. We don't get served a cold cup of coffee and our well-being drops. Although that might be a little bit tenuous, that example, now I say it out loud. But no, in all seriousness, it's not our emotion. It's not about being happy all the time. Aristotle, in his book of Ethics, in trying to describe well-being, said a beautiful analogy of, it's not one fine day that makes the spring. And he spoke about, it's about being in a position to weather the storms of life. So at Huber Social, we define it as having the capability and the opportunity to fulfill your potential and live a life you value. And the emphasis on the you is very intentional because well-being is a personal experience. We can't come up with a list of things that matter for everyone and assess people against it and say that's your well-being. That's not how life works. All those factors, our history, are all interconnected. Much like longitude, it matters where you find yourself in the world. That recipe for well-being is unique for each of us, which presents some challenge when it comes to measuring it. So how do we measure well-being? At Huber Social, we have two parts to it. We want to understand people's state of well-being, and then secondly, what's driving it. So for the state of well-being, as I said, it's about your personal experience. So to measure that, we measure subjective well-being. And that approach is a widely accepted approach. Most notably, the OECD measures subjective well-being, and countries of the OECD have adopted that. And there's various nuances to the methodology, but at the core, it's really about measuring satisfaction with life. So to measure someone's state of well-being, we use a satisfaction with life scale, and it has 5 questions that give us a score for how people are experiencing their life. Then secondly, we want to understand what people need to be in the best position to thrive. We want to understand the drivers of well-being. So at that point, we measure people's level of capability and their access to opportunity. Underneath capability, we're measuring things like resilience, life skills and wellness, mental, physical and spiritual health. And on the opportunity side, we're measuring access to relationships, resources, societal systems and services, like the medical system, political system, as well as our self-development opportunities. So the opportunity to develop emotionally, socially, and cognitively. So what I'm describing there at that second point is like a massive shopping list of human needs. And when we come to measure well-being in a certain context, we make sure we work with people being impacted, the relevant people are as close to it, to be able to set that scope of what's relevant to measure. Then, what this measurement is able to tell us, and in terms of measuring social impact, we're looking at, has there been an overall shift in that state of well-being? Secondly, how has that been achieved? So has it been achieved through building levels of capability and providing access to opportunity? And then thirdly, we want to understand the opportunities to maximise or lift that well-being. But we don't just rely on looking at the factors and going, oh, people are low on this, because that might not necessarily be what matters. Instead, we use statistics to identify what of those factors have a unique relationship with predicting or shifting that overall state of well-being. And the power in that is, instead of just leaving it as scoring low or high, that leaves it open for someone else to come in and set the priorities or enforce a certain worldview on what matters. But through using statistics and subjective wellbeing evaluation, that reveals what matters and what are the priorities to the people who are experiencing life. And that's, I think, a real key part to solving so many social issues is actually letting the people being impacted reveal what matters to them. So how can we use this wellbeing measurement? How can governments use it? How can businesses use it? How can our community services use it? Well, first of all, we can use it to ensure that overall we're having a positive impact. So through measuring overall well-being, we're measuring, I guess, the net effect of interventions. Often we stop at just measuring certain outcomes, like we've provided someone with a house, tick, but that can be achieved at the expense of other aspects of people's lives. They might be under so much financial pressure that overall their well-being is actually suffering. So it's really important check to make sure that overall there's a positive impact occurring. This case study was one of our first clients and continues a client of Huber Social today, or a partner. And they Love Mercy Foundation, and they work in northern Uganda across different communities, and they provide women with a seed loan. They also do financial literacy and agricultural training. And the idea is that the women plant the crop, harvest the crop, and use that profit to go and start a business or to benefit their family and community, and they return that original seed loan to go and help another woman. So a really fantastic model. But the CEO came to us, very brave CEO, and I say brave because she said, look, we've had lots of consultants work with us, and they're able to show that we're lifting income in these communities by this much, that this is the yield of seed that we have, and this many children are educated. But I need to know, we need to know, are we actually doing good in these communities, really helping them based on what they need? So she was prepared to be doing it wrong, essentially. The results continue to be positive for Love Mercy, thankfully, and women that participate in the program have higher wellbeing year on year to a certain point, and then it starts to plateau. So that's just one example of how it works to make sure overall there's a positive impact. The second way we can use this measurement is we can identify what is needed and manage our risk through knowing that. So this example is At Work Australia. It's a job services or employment service provider. And with them, we did a national study on the needs of job seekers around Australia. And it was fascinating to discover that regardless of a job seeker's background, there were 6 needs that were consistent for job seekers. And with this, At Work were able to look at their programs and make sure that these factors were addressed across all of them. And they included things like job seekers being heard and respected, which doesn't even cost anything to improve the programs. And then beyond those 6 things, we looked at 9 different subgroups of job seekers to understand what are needs unique to those groups, so that At Work could design programs to better meet these different groups' needs. And this study was picked up by government and launched to help inform employment services all across Australia. And thirdly, measuring wellbeing can help us understand how we can better work together. This is an example of a charity called Resilient Lismore. So they're up helping communities in northern New South Wales in the flood and fire affected communities. And they partnered with Reece Plumbing. So Reece Plumbing came in and did the essential plumbing services. But of course, through measuring wellbeing, we understood the holistic profile of their needs, and Resilient Lismore were able to offer those more wraparound support services, and together they have a really effective impact. And finally, overall, being able to measure social value in terms of well-being, we're able to demonstrate the value of things beyond financial value. So this example here, we've done a study in New Zealand, a region of New Zealand, working with an organisation called Creative Waikato. And the findings were that if people have high engagement with creativity and the arts, they have higher well-being. So, in conclusion, my point is that as longitude is to latitude, we need to measure well-being alongside financial value if we want to stay on track. Thank you.